So it's always a great day when we're cooking brisket, and today I'm going to be trying the Aaron Franklin brisket method to see how good this brisket will come out. All right, here is our brisket. Now, this is a choice grade brisket. It is Angus beef, which I found the Angus choice is a little bit better than just your run-of-the-mill choice. Now, obviously, this is probably not what Aaron Franklin is using at his restaurant. From what I've heard, he's using Creekstone Farms prime beef briskets. So I've never tried a Creekstone brisket, but from what I've heard, they are some of the best briskets out there. So we're gonna be starting with this choice and just make the best of it. Now, I'm sure if you've seen any of the Franklin barbecue stuff out there, there's a bunch of conspiracy and rumors about all the different methods he is using. And I actually read an article recently where Franklin himself was saying they usually change it up in the restaurant anyway. So something he might have been doing a few years ago, he's no longer doing anymore. And I believe he has his own seasoning out now, and that is actually what he is using on his briskets along with salt and pepper. And if you really want to get into it, I would highly suggest checking out Jeremy Yoder at Mad Scientist Barbecue. He really does some deep dives into the Franklin methods, and a lot of the information I got was through his channel. He's had Franklin's brisket on a few occasions, so he would know flavor profiles. I've never eaten at Franklin, so I have nothing really to compare it to. I'm just going to try some of these methods out because I've always been interested in giving them a shot and seeing what kind of flavor it adds to the brisket. Now, this is a 15, almost 16 pound brisket, and for me, it's very difficult to source some good briskets. A lot of times I find the brisket has a very thin flat. It has a weird shape. They're not the best briskets. So what I like to do is pick up a larger brisket and really trim it down a lot so I can get one nice smaller brisket out of this. And I really don't mind having all the extra trim from the fat and the meat, because I love to take the meat, grind it up for burgers, and that fat I make into tallow. If you want to see how I make that into tallow, I have a video. I'll make sure to put a link down in the description below for you. So let's go ahead, get this opened up, and we'll start trimming this brisket. And this brisket actually has a pretty small decal here. So as I start trimming this brisket up, you're gonna notice what I meant when I said I can't get the best briskets. So I'm just gonna pat this dry best I can for now. So I always like to start on the bottom side with this fat right here, and you can see it kind of peels out by itself. And this one is actually pretty small. The fat usually is a lot more in this spot. Just like that. And again, save the trimming, tallow, burgers, a lot of different options. Now you're going to want a nice sharp knife for trimming brisket. A semi-stiff boning knife is my preferred method. I'll put a link to one of these knives down below. It is a Victorinox semi-stiff boning knife. These go for super cheap money. Highly suggest getting one of these. This is probably my most used knife, and I'm sure you've seen this. If you put your hand underneath, it makes it a lot easier to trim this fat off the bottom here. All right, so this doesn't look too bad. You got a bunch of fat over here. We'll probably address this later, but I'll just take a few swipes at it now until you start to get to that point. Once that point is exposed, you're in pretty good shape here. See how much fat is on here. And you can see there's a beautiful gash right there. So we might have to just cut this right out. Again, like I said, this is what I get with my briskets. But it'll all go to good use. Love me some smash burgers with brisket. Now the problem when they make a gash like that, now we have this dip, so you're really gonna have to work to try and make this thing aerodynamic now, but we'll get it figured out. All right, so this is pretty good for now. Let's get this flipped over to the top side. What I like to start with is this right here. We're gonna have a lot of work on this, but I like to just start by cutting it down a little bit. We're gonna dress it further, but just to start. And then it'll show you, you can see there's a pocket of fat right here. So I like to come in, kind of just scoop that out. There's still some more hard fat in there. We're gonna try and stick to that 1/4 inch of fat rule. And I like to just poke. That's how you can kind of tell how much fat you have. So this is feeling pretty good. All right here is probably good. So let's spin this around. And we have a bunch right here. I'm not too worried about the edges because I'm going to trim this down a little bit. So like I've said before, aerodynamics is probably one of the most important things when you're trimming a brisket. And the one nice thing about this brisket is the fat cap actually came trimmed down pretty decently. You can see here though, that's going to be an issue. I already know it's just going to start pooling there. So I'm going to try and do my best to try and smooth that out. Same thing with this over here. Like I said, we're going to trim down these sides. But before we do that, let's address this side again. You can see this big pocket of fat here. So I'm just going to start cutting this down little by little. And I know this meat is good up here, but it's just going to get all burnt up. So I'd rather use it for burger meat. Now you can see the flat over here. This is all going to have to be cut off. This is just going to get super dried out. So I'm going to cut that whole strip, something like this. And I love seeing big pieces like this because I just know my ground meat is going to be a nice pile. All right, so let's start trimming this down a little more. Again, like I said, aerodynamics very important with this. So we can't have this sticking up here. We want this as flat as possible. All right, so there's still a good amount of fat in here, but I just don't want to take too much of that out right now. So I'm gonna get this flipped around. And this isn't looking too bad. I just want to try and trim this a little bit here. You can see how if you peel it up, how it sticks, that's just gonna get burnt. And I like to constantly just kind of rub the brisket down so I can get a general shape. See how this thing's sitting. Is there any high spots? You can see this is sticking up a little bit here I don't like. But for the most part, this looks pretty good. Now I want to trim down this side a bit. Now I want to trim down the flat a little bit. How's that looking? Not too bad. All right, let's get this turned to this side. So this is looking pretty decent. So a few spots that need to be rounded off. But for the most part, looking pretty good. So I am going to trim this flat down a little bit here. Probably do something, let's see, maybe like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then this corner needs to be rounded. All right, so that is not too bad of a brisket now. I just want to push it down. I don't really like how this point is sticking up a little bit, but I'm liking how this is looking. Now I'm going to flip it over and we're just going to trim anything on this back side that needs to be touched up. Sometimes there's some scraggly bits. Give it a scrape, get all these fat pieces off here from the board. But this actually looks pretty decent. I don't think I'm going to have to do much more here. Maybe just a few little spots, but I like it. I think I'm gonna call it good. I got a big pile of trimmings over here. We're gonna separate that, but just check out that. It's a pretty nice brisket compared to what it was when I started this thing. All right, so as you can tell, I had to do a bunch of trimming to this brisket. That's just the way that I get my briskets. I found the best way is to buy a larger brisket and do an extreme trim on it. Now, a lot of times you can go out there and buy a brisket that is pretty much trimmed up almost exactly like this, and you won't need to do much trimming at all. But for me, I'm getting a pretty bad product from the get-go, so I have to do a lot of work. So just don't be alarmed at how much I trimmed off this. Now, of course, you could cook it the way that it was, but for me, when I'm doing a brisket, I want each one of these slices to be absolutely delicious. And all these pieces over here that I cut off, they're just gonna get super dry. And I mean, yes, they will be good. You can also save them for chili later, but I would much rather have the raw meat for grinding down, and I could make chili with the ground meat or smash burgers. Your options are just better. Now, moving on to seasoning, of course, Franklin just says salt and pepper. If you watch his masterclass or you've seen any of his videos, he tells you 50-50 salt and pepper. Now, the reason he's telling you that is because these are beginner courses he's teaching, and he wants you to really focus on running a clean fire and getting good smoke and not hiding any flavors with any seasoning. And today I'm going to be doing the salt, pepper, and Lowry's combo that people were saying he was using for quite some time. Let's go ahead and start getting this seasoned. So we're going to start with the bottom side, as usual. And I'm going to be using a binder today, which I usually don't, and you really won't need one on this, but I got a little pickle juice here. At some point, I thought I read somewhere that he was using pickle juice as a binder, or maybe it was mustard mixed with pickle juice, I don't know. But that got me intrigued as a binder, so today I'm going to be using just some straight pickle juice on this. We don't need much, it's a light coating. You get both sides. Again, I usually don't use a binder, so see how this goes. Smells nice. Now I'm going to start off with the black pepper. I want the pepper on there first because that's what I want the majority of seasoning to be stuck to this brisket. If I put the Lowry's on, it's going to cover all the meat first. I don't really want that. Pepper's going to be your main seasoning for a brisket. This is going to help collect smoke flavor. It's going to help give it a beautiful bark. So always focus on the pepper first. Get the sides, another layer up on the top. Pretty good. Now we're going to be using Lowry's, but I'm going to throw a little salt on there anyway. This is a big piece of meat. And then now we go on with the Lowry's. So in Jeremy Yoder's most recent video talking about the Franklin brisket, he was trying it at the end, and he was talking about the flavor, specifically the sweetness of the brisket. He was saying that the Franklin brisket had a sweetness to it, and when you render down the beef fat, you will get a little bit of sweetness to it. But this Lowry's also has some sugar in it, so I think that's going to help. Now, I want to add something special to this that I'm sure Franklin's not using, but I want to see how this comes out. Now, since they were talking about sweetness, I got this granulated honey. I didn't want to add sugar or brown sugar onto this. This granulated honey is perfect because it's not overly sweet, just a touch, and it has really nice flavor. So I'm going to go on with just a little bit of this. We're not going to go very heavy with it, just a touch, like I said. It's got that perfect amount of sweetness for me. Curious to see how this works. I've been testing it out on a bunch of different things, and I really enjoy using it. All right, so that is the bottom side. Just try and get these edges. All right, so black pepper on the top here. Touch that salt. This is just kosher salt. Now the Lowry's. Then a touch of that granulated honey. All right, so we are all ready for the smoker, and the way that this needs to be cooked is the same as you should cook any other brisket. When you put it on there, you're gonna wanna start your temperatures low, probably around 2 to 225. Now, as the brisket cooks, you can take that temperature up to all the way near 300 degrees, at least for me on my smoker I can. So I got the smoker started up, we're around 225. Let's go ahead, throw this on. All right, so I'm gonna run this on my bottom rack here. And I'm putting the fat side towards where my heat's coming from, as always. Go ahead and close this up, let it smoke. All right, now that the brisket is on at that low temperature, I'm just gonna let this go probably for 5 hours or so till I really check on it. Maybe around the 3-hour mark, I'll give it a look. If it needs some spritzing, I'm gonna go ahead and use that pickle juice throughout the cook with the spritzing. But I'm hoping it'll look pretty good and we won't get any hot spots on it. Now, like I said, I'm gonna gradually start raising the temperature on this because once it gets some nice color and smoke flavor from that low temperature, we can crank this thing up to around 300 degrees and really get that fat to render down on this brisket. Now, I am going to wrap this up because that is what they do at Franklin's. We're gonna be using butcher paper with some beef tallow. So I'm not gonna wrap the brisket up until the bark is at the point where I want it and it looks really nice. So this is probably gonna happen somewhere around the mid 180s for temperature. So we're still gonna hit that stall. You're not gonna wanna wrap at the stall. I like to let the brisket push through the stall. It's gonna let you get some nice bark. Wrap it up and just let it finish for a couple hours and it'll be done. So I will see you guys back out here in a few hours to check on that brisket. All right, we are 5 hours in on the Franklin brisket. Let's see how this is coming along. And at this point, I have ramped up the temperature to about 300 degrees. So you can see we have a little bit of pooling. Let's go ahead and dump that out. We can see this bark is coming along pretty well here. Definitely needs quite some more time before we even wrap. I want this thing to be a lot darker than this, but take a look. Not too bad at all. Just that one pooling spot. Other than that, it is looking pretty good. This is what I was worried about here, but it looks like it is dripping out. Getting a little dark on the flat over here. Overall, not that bad. So I am spritzing it with some pickle juice here. I started doing this probably about an hour ago, and this is only the third time I've spritzed it. But I will see you back out here when this is ready to wrap. All right, so it's been 8.5 hours, almost 9 hours on this Franklin style brisket. Now, I just checked the temp in the flat and the point. We're looking at about 180 degrees in the flat and around 175 in the point. The bark is looking perfect. Now, I thought we were gonna be in the mid 180s for when it was time to pull and wrap, but the way it looks now, I am going to go ahead and pull it and get it wrapped. And the important thing is we have already gone through our stall. So let me go ahead, get this butcher paper all set up, and we can check out this brisket. All right, now I'm just gonna spray some of that pickle juice on this paper. You could use anything you want for this. You could just use water. The only reason I do this is because I like the paper to be a little wet when I wrap it. Just makes it easier to wrap up. Let me go get that brisket so we can check it out. And here it is, hot. All right, just check out the brisket. You can see this bark is absolutely gorgeous. This is what you want before you go ahead and wrap it. Make sure your brisket has a really nice bark on it, just like this. So let's go ahead and get this put down. So here I have some beef tallow that I actually made with the trimmings from this brisket. And I'm just gonna go ahead, dump a good amount of this on there. Fresh tallow, nothing beats it. Like I said, I'll put a link down below for the video on how you can make your own tallow. Now, let's go ahead and just get this wrapped up. All right, so the brisket is all wrapped up. I'm gonna get this back on the smoker and I'm gonna bring it up to the 200 to 203 degree range. At that point, I'll pull it off. I'm gonna let it come down to 140 to 160 degrees. Then I will unwrap it from this paper, wrap it in some new butcher paper with tallow, and then get it in my warming cabinet to sit overnight. Now, this is a method that I learned from Jeremy Yoder at Mad Scientist Barbecue. He seems to think that Franklin's is unwrapping their brisket after they have rested them and then rewrapping them for the hold. And I could completely see why you would do that, because I have taken a brisket off the smoker and held it in the same paper, and a lot of times it gets stuck to the bark and you lose a lot of great bark that way. Let's jump ahead to tomorrow so we can slice up this brisket and see how it came out. All right, here we are. So after I got this wrapped up, I let it cook for another 3.5 hours till it was at the point that I like. The flat was temping out at about 200 degrees and the point was around 195, but it felt super tender, and I knew since I was gonna be doing overnight rest, it would give it more of a chance to render down that fat. So I pulled it off and I let it rest. I let the temp come down to about 150 degrees. I got it unwrapped. I wrapped it up in some fresh butcher paper with some more beef tallow. Then I threw it in my warmer, and it's been in there for about 8 to 9 hours. I've been super excited to try this out to see how it actually tastes. So without further ado, let's go ahead and unwrap this Franklin style brisket. Oh yeah, nice and barky. Besides that one spot, we had some pooling. Let's go ahead and get this out and onto the table. And again, the method of rewrapping the butcher paper is great because none of this butcher paper sticks to the brisket, which, like I said, I've had issues with in the past. But there it is. What a beautiful brisket this thing is. Just check out the bark on there. You can see how tender it is. This is what you want in a brisket. Now, what you're gonna get with a brisket is this end will probably be a little dried out, and sometimes this can get dried out as well. That's why aerodynamics is so important. I could have really cut this down even more and it probably wouldn't have dried out as badly, but this meat is still going to be plenty good. There's plenty of fat in there, so I'm not too worried about it. Everyone knows the ends of the flat here get dried out. Still a good bite, just a little bit dry. I usually cut that off and I'll eat it myself. I have no problem with it, but connoisseurs out there might have other things to say about it. But before I slice this up, just got to snap a few photos, so I'll be right back. So I always like to cut it right kind of where the point and the flat meet, somewhere around here, and we'll get a nice cross section of this brisket. Oh, and it is tender. It is tender. Oh yeah. Hopefully you can see the absolute juiciness of that brisket. Check that out. Oh yeah. This is what I call a brisket. So good. Check it out. Juicy. Juicy, juicy. I'm barely squeezing it. Look at that. And this is choice grade. Don't forget about that. Now, I'm going to get some slices here of the flat. These are some of my favorite slices right here, where you get a little bit of the flat and a little bit of the point. Beautiful. Now we'll get a little cross section of this point. Gosh, check it out. Amazing. This is a good looking brisket. Check out those slices there. Oh yeah. Fat is rendered down beautifully. You can see here, right at the top here, see how that fat is nice and gold and rendered? That right there is a nice piece of brisket. Then you can see how tender it is. Just falls apart. I gotta give it a try. That's it right there. This is a hell of a brisket. I'm gonna try a piece with all that nice rendered fat. The seasoning is perfect. I really can't ask much more for flavor. It does have a beautiful sweetness to it. You kind of get that with rendered fat, but I think that honey helped a little bit as well. Like I said, it's not overly sweet. It's a very mild sweetness. Be sure to check out that seasoning. I'll put a link down below if you're interested. But I am super happy with how this came out. And I've done the Goldie's method no wrap before, which I thought was fantastic. And I like how you don't need to go through the process of wrapping at all. But man, this brisket is giving that a run for its money. With flavor-wise, this is fantastic. It is super tender, nice and juicy. Let me see if I can get a slice of the point here. It's not as overcooked as I thought it would be on the end here. Oh my. Tell me this is not your favorite piece of a brisket right here. Like, look at this. This is ridiculous. This is so good. And you can see it still sticks together, but just falls apart tender. Man, oh man, that is good brisket. It's got a different flavor than I'm used to. I'm not really sure what it is. The bark on here is incredible and it softens up nicely with that warm hold, but it has a really beautiful smoke flavor on there. This is one of the best briskets I've definitely cooked before. Super impressed with how this came out. Now, if you don't have an offset smoker like I do and you want to get similar results, I have a easy brisket video using a pellet smoker. You can check it out right over here. And if you want to see that Goldie's barbecue video brisket, you can check this out right over here. And if you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe right here. I'm going to put a link to everything I like to use down in the description below. Be sure to check it out. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like. Really helps out the channel. But most importantly, get out there and smoke something good.